Welcome to the England pod. Welcome back to the England pod. We are back. And here's what's in the rear view mirror. Gareth Southgate, overly defensive formations, Avril Lavigne, bad German public transport, reaction podcasts soaked in session IPA from colourful cans. It was all England all summer, but now, these days, it's more about Lee Carsley, overly attacking formations, the national anthem, potentially German managers, and sober reaction pods. For now, one thing stays the same. It's George Ellick, it's Dave Walker, it's me, Ali Maxwell, and now it's all England, all millennium?
Forever.
Is it?
England forever, like you've got tattooed on your chest.
George, we've been asked quite a lot over the last few months, all three of us, what's happening with the England pod now the Euros is finished? So, what's happening with the England pod now that the Euros is finished?
I think like any great romance, it was a beautiful summer fling that we'll look back on with incredible memories, culminating in a glorious romantic break in Germany. And then we just needed some time apart. Ali, you and I don't spend much time apart, but we needed to not see Dave for a couple of months just to remember how much we loved each other, and from hear from our friends how good they thought we were for each other. And now we've had a conversation and we're going official. We are back. We want to do this long term. We want to do the England pod. We want to be the fans' voice covering England from a different perspective, and that's what we're going to do.
We are back. For me personally, I'm really excited about this going forward. Obviously, we've got World Cup 2026 in our mind, and we'd love to make something really special that summer. But between now and then, there'll be loads as well. And from my point of view, like, I personally think that the general coverage of the England senior men's national team is pretty miserable in the most part. I think it's quite po-faced. I think it's very outcome driven in the most, in my opinion, tedious and kind of outdated way. And I think, most importantly, that it can contribute to a sense that being a fan of England is somehow a chore, particularly outside of the major tournaments. And I don't like that. Like, I think we all know that the life cycle of an England international break is like, get angry at the squad announcement about the omissions or the inclusions, probably get a bit angry about the performances no matter what the result is, think that England should do better at all times, ignore the opposition completely and just be so England focused that it's like any opposition team is just like, they're just dummies in a different kit. You can get angry about national anthems or flags on kits, or you can get angry about the people that get angry about those things. And for me, I don't know why it needs to be that. Like, we want the team to win every game and we're desperate for England to win a tournament, but I don't think we should experience the journey as some kind of chore. So I'd like to have fun while we do this as well. I hope that's all right. Let's talk football. Lee Carsley's been the England interim manager since we last spoke. He's had 4 games. England have won 3 of them and very notably lost against Greece last week. Dave, we're in UEFA Nations League Group B, and we are currently second after 4 games, and we're 3 points behind Greece, who have won all 4. We play against them and once more against Ireland in the November international break. Get us going with some Carsley and England chat. How have you experienced his interim tenure so far?
I think it's been interesting because we kind of hinted, we kind of thought this might be the outcome when we last spoke. Because the last pod we did was Southgate had resigned. There had been no announcement at that point as to what was going to come next. But we thought the sensible option, the safe option initially might be to get Carsley in, give yourself time to decide what to do. And of course, with your background of watching the under-21s and how well he's performed with them in the past, winning the Euros, I think there was some excitement from you about what potentially a Carsley-helmed England could look like. And I think that was shared by some fans and some of the press, but it's been very interesting to see how quickly it's turned in the last week, because I think after those first 2 games against Ireland and against Finland, 2 wins, attacking football, some new players in the team, people like Grealish and Trent kind of being brought back into the fold, made a prominent part of the side, the likes of Angel Gomez all of a sudden in the team, people thinking, oh, this is quite good, he might be in the box seat here. And then all of a sudden it's taken a couple of, let's say, clumsy, badly handled press conferences and post-match interviews and a defeat against Greece, and he seems miles away now.
I mean, we had national journalists calling for his sacking before he even took charge of a game.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. I'd blacked that out.
And we, in this whole Carsley conversation, I think at the crux of it is, I just don't blame him if he can't be bothered. Like, not that he shouldn't want the job, but like he's been through, before managing a side, he is basically on the front pages for not wanting to sing an anthem that he's never sung before. He loses a game against Greece, and fingers are pointed at him very quickly. Like, I don't know. It feels like, from a personal perspective, for a guy who turned down the opportunity to manage Brentford in the Championship because he didn't want the extra scrutiny, it's not a massive surprise if he's like, this isn't for me. But I assume the FA were hoping that he might want it and would make their job much easier, and he would do well. My one kind of maybe like slightly hot take on the whole thing is that I don't think there was much difference in basically any of the 4 performances in terms of actually how good England were. Like against Ireland, again, I really enjoyed, and we won it fairly comfortably. Ireland missed 2 unbelievably good opportunities at 0-0 to go ahead in that game, and then in the second game against Finland, again winning the game 2-0, Finland created a couple of really scary moments for England. The difference was against Greece, they took their chances and England didn't. Like, England had loads of opportunities in the first half to be ahead in that game. Like Cole Palmer missing a really good opportunity, Bellingham had a shot tipped over the bar early. All that changed was that in the other games the opposition didn't take their chances. Against Greece they did. And what also didn't help Lee Carsley, and I thought this was incredibly harsh, because Sam Matterface on commentary really hammered it home, is that they scored, was it 4 disallowed goals or 3 disallowed goals? They were offside, but they kept being like, the ball has been in the back of the England net 6 times tonight.
Yeah, that high defensive line doing its job.
Yeah, but like 2 of them counted. Like that doesn't matter. That isn't a fair reflection on how the game went, because disallowed goals or offside goals don't count. So and I think the team selection for Greece didn't help him, where and this was kind of lost in the narrative. Like if Harry Kane was perceived to be fit against Greece, he'd have started, and we wouldn't have played Bellingham as a false 9 or played with no striker or whatever else. We also, international football, there is a history of teams who play with no nominal striker, winning major tournaments. We've seen Spain do it, we've seen Argentina do it, unless you're going to count Messi as a striker. So it wasn't quite as clumsy as we make out. And then
was the sticking point not the fact that Palmer played in the double pivot more so than
for sure,
we played with the false 9?
But also and Foden as well. Like you look at the difference between Thursday and Sunday, where suddenly you've got a player in Angel Gomez who basically wants the ball fast into feet on the turn consistently, which is so different to everybody else. Can pass out of tight spaces, is very quick with his passing. You've got Jack Grealish playing on the inside left, where he is always wanting the ball to feet, is so good at retaining possession, looking after the ball in deeper areas. There were no players of that profile against Greece, coupled with the fact, and this is what kind of annoyed me the most, is that in so many games under Gareth Southgate, team sheets announced and you've got Rice and Phillips, or Rice and someone playing as the 2 holding midfielders, and it's like, we don't need 2 holding midfielders, we're playing whoever. Like, they're terrible. We play with 1 holding midfielder against Greece, and every time they attacked in transition, we look completely at sea. Like, it's not, football isn't easy. It's not a case of like, the opposition don't have players that we know, so therefore we can just play like 6 attacking players. And I know that normally you'd have wanted a striker, but all the kind of talk before the game was Lee Carsley's found a way to play Bellingham, Saka, Foden, Palmer, all in the same team. And yeah, he found a way to do it, and it didn't look great, and suddenly he's being vilified for what I remember quite a lot of England fans saying, like, this is what we should be doing for the last year and a half, as if just sticking loads of good players on the pitch is enough to get your result.
It's been a real rollercoaster as an England under 21s travelling fan and hipster fan, in that like people who liked a band before they were cool, seeing Carsley's first 2 games and the freshness and the excitement and the attacking nature of the performances and the goals that we scored, which were, to my eyes, a few of them looked like goals that England very rarely, if ever, scored under Gareth Southgate. And all of the positive stuff I lapped up, but there was that aspect of like, yeah, well, I knew this was going to happen. Yeah. That's what Lee Carsley done. He's a legend. And then it kind of all flipped on its head, as you say, in the latest camp, as the word that he loves to use for an international break is. And it kind of makes me laugh, that the tactic-specific stuff, because at the under-21s Euros, which England won without conceding a goal, Carsley played a right-back at left-back, almost exclusively, whether it was Max Aarons or someone else, I can't remember. He played a central midfielder at right back in James Garner. So, like, imagine, for example, if he had put Rice at right back, that would almost be the equivalent of what he did for the 21s. Angel Gomez, who had the season before played quite a lot in the 10, but also quite a lot in a deeper midfield role, was in defensive midfield with Curtis Jones, who's obviously a bit more natural in that position. And then 4 attackers played, none of whom were strikers at any point in that tournament. Cameron Archer came off the bench, did maybe start one game, but in the main it was Gibbs White and Anthony Gordon who played as the central strikers with Smith Rowe and someone else out on the width. So it was actually very similar to the shape that we've seen, and even the funky stuff that he did that Southgate would never have done was similar to what he did with the 21s, who won the Euros without conceding a goal. So clearly, at that level, with that group of English players, it was possible to play winning international football with some kind of tactical funkiness and some really attack-minded stuff going on. But we've seen, as you discussed, that maybe at senior level, more so than at under-21s level, teams like Greece and the others that we've played, Finland had a lot of chances on Sunday night as well, they are used to playing in transition and they are much better at doing so. These are senior players now, and in many cases they play a lot of their football on the break, and they know maybe a bit more how to hurt a team like England who are playing such a high line and who are keeping fewer players back.
Yeah, but I think it's also, you're right from a tactical point of view, but it's also highlights the difference between being the England head coach, manager, and being in charge of the under-21s. You know, apart from you lot and your mates who go and see them every summer every other summer in the tournaments, and the odd bit of coverage that gets, they basically operate completely under the radar, and you can do stuff like that. And indeed, he probably had time to embed that system, and it worked with that group of players. I'm sure it didn't. I'm sure not every single moment went perfectly. Whereas all of a sudden you do something a little bit out of the ordinary or try something different in a Nations League game against Greece, and it doesn't go well, and you get pilloried for it.
But that's what worries me the most, is that if that game was an under-21 game, there's no way that England finished the game playing 4-4-2 with 2 strikers up top, basically playing clip balls into the channels, which is what we ended up doing against Greece. And that to me was like Carsley basically being like, oh, I can't really deal with the flack for this. I'm going to basically just revert to something that's totally at odds with what his own kind of ideology is. And that was a worry, because I think when you've got a manager, take someone like Guardiola,
and he was praised for doing that, though,
I know,
by a lot of people.
I know.
And it did result in a goal, sort of. But
kind of.
Did we enjoy his starting 11 or his team selection against Greece being described as like a Garth Crooks team of 11?
Yeah.
I quite enjoyed that, I must say. And I think it's worth just reading out some quotes from Carsley about why he did that, because I'm the sort of guy that can get quite angry about what I perceive to be, naive selection. And then generally, if a manager explains why he made a decision, even if the outcome was bad, I think it's fair to say, yeah, all right, I can see where you're coming from there.
It was a reverse mullet.
So he said, I think with the players that we've got, I think we've got to be courageous at times with our systems and be creative. I could easily have gone, we have recognised number 9s, we had 2 on the bench, but I thought it was important to try something different. I think at this stage, coming off the last 2 games, I never at any point thought that I've got it cracked. It was a case of let's try something different, and I'm happy to take the blame for that. It was totally my idea. I thought about it long and hard in terms of how it might look, how we might build, and how it might feel. My position and understanding of coaching, I want to attack. You've seen my teams play. It's something that's really important to me. And with that, you do lose games. You do lose some games. It's not ideal. Of course it's not. But with that mentality, I found that I definitely win more games. I think that's really interesting. You might say, when you're England manager, you can't afford to lose games because the pressure is too intense and it can undermine the good work that you're trying to do. His point is, whether that's true or not, having this mentality will help us to win more games than we previously win with the handbrake on. Even if we might lose more games as well, we might actually have a much higher ceiling to the team. And that's what we've all been crying out for. So I thought that was really, really interesting. I also read a brilliant piece from a site called Tactics Journal. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I'd never read Kyle's stuff before, and now I'm really obsessed with it. He's got this amazing way of writing tactical pieces that are quite quick and snappy, but also have some good detail. His point was that the consistent issue from Southgate to Carsley, regardless of systems, players playing in whatever roles, in his words, is the non-existent service into the centre of the pitch. That's why it can look stale and lifeless in attack, because the defenders and the holding midfielder, particularly I'm afraid when it's Rice, I think, they pass everything out wide into the wings or maybe into the half spaces because it's a bit safer and it's a bit easier than punching it right into someone who's in the 10 spot. And it boxes the opposition team in when you get passed out to the wings. So this guy Kyle's point was, it's not something a different structural formation will fix. The defenders and midfielders need to be more willing to play the ball into tight spaces centrally. The best moments come when they play and combine in tight pass and move situations. And the point being that Foden, Palmer, these guys thrive, in theory, receiving the ball in those spaces. But in an England shirt, they've never really been able to show that off because they so rarely get that service in that central number 10 area. It always goes wide, and we try and work something out from that position. I thought that was quite an interesting point about why the attack can look stale, both under Southgate, but even so sometimes under Carsley. And
there'll be an element to that as well, which is why I think in many ways Carsley's the worst possible profile for an interim manager, where it's all so process-driven. It's such a shift away from what Gareth Southgate would have instilled into his players. Like the mindset there about we'll win more games if we play a certain way. It just, we look at the defensive unit now, and we look at the way that they're asked to be brave on the ball, and they're asked to be brave in playing a high line. And is it a massive surprise that we've looked way worse, way more porous now after what I'd love to know how many sessions Carsley actually had with the players on the grass since he took over. Like very, very few. It feels like we're basically at the beginning of what would be quite a long process to completely revolutionise the style of play, and yet people are so ready to write it off or judge it off the back of 4 games, 3 of which we've won.
Might we miss the defensive record that we've had over the last 6 years if we do go for this style and we get picked off sometimes and lose?
I mean, I don't understand what people want. I'm so confused. Where the idea was that under Southgate, you cannot have watched the Euros, and I know that we were a terrible watch for most of it, but not see that our really solid defensive unit, our ability to prevent the opposition from creating good chances, was the fundamental reason why we got to the final. Basically, we barely conceded any chances, and that was it. That was the crux of it. And people were like, "We don't want this. This is rubbish. We're not utilising the players right." And then we changed the style of play, and we're going to concede more chances. And it's like, well, no, this is rubbish. We need something else. We need someone to come in and change it again.
I think that's part of Southgate's legacy, though, is that almost football aside, obviously there was obviously criticism of Southgate's football increasingly as his reign went on. But in terms of his achievements and what he did for us, he got us so close but never got us over the line in terms of winning a World Cup or a Euros. People now expect this next era to be like, well, we've kind of got everything sorted. We just need that person to come in and get us over the line to take that next step, which is true, which is fine. But it still doesn't kind of happen overnight. It's no one's going to come in and just suddenly just tweak one thing and it's all going to be fine. They're going to come in with their own ideas, their own way of playing. They're going to change the players. The squad's going to change over time, naturally, as it does in international football with players retiring and all that. So there is still going to be a process. And I think part of the reaction we've seen to Carsley over the last few days is filling a vacuum of uncertainty. We don't quite know whether Carsley is favoured by the FA, whether he wants the job. We're still unsure about whether there are other leading candidates. The odds are changing all the time in terms of who's the favourite, and that naturally will lead the media and some of the fans, but particularly the media and the press, to follow that line of inquiry and find out, well, what's actually going on here. And Carsley has fumbled a few times in terms of when he's been asked, do you want the job, saying, hopefully I'll go back to the under-21s, then kind of rowing back, but then kind of rowing back on that, rowing back, and it's not clear at all. And it gives you the air, he gives you the air of a man who isn't sure of his own thoughts at the moment. And I don't think that's a good position for him to be in. But on that point, what I did find interesting was I went back and had a look from 7 years ago. This was after Gareth Southgate's first 2 matches as interim manager.
Is it one of your Facebook statuses?
After Allardyce was, gotten rid of. He basically said pretty much the exact same thing as Lee Carsley has said, but perhaps in a slightly more eloquent way. But he said the agreement was to take these 4 games to keep them continuity, and then everybody has a chance to reflect and review how it's gone. Then the FA have a decision to make as to what they want to do. I think it's a decision that needs a lot of thought. And I also think when you're in the position I'm in, you need to be clear of what is being asked. So he didn't say, I want the job. He was like, I'm not sure. I'll have a think about it. It's very different being asked to take a few games as to being asked to take on the job.
He'd already
full-time.
turned it down as well.
And he had turned it down before, exactly, before Allardyce got the job. So it shows you how quickly things can change. But even in that little example there, it shows you the difference between someone like Southgate and Carsley. Southgate is just a naturally seemingly more confident, eloquent, capable of dealing with the media, and he got better at that over time as well, it has to be said. Doesn't say that Carsley doesn't have the capacity to improve and get help maybe in that role, that side of the role, but at the moment, to me, he feels like a number two, or like a guy who's a really good coach. There was a moment when we were playing Greece and the camera shot to him on the touchline and he was crouched down on his own looking at an iPad, and it seemed like there should be someone else next to him. He seemed like the guy that's looking at the tactics, and the head coach is going, what do we do?
So basically give it to Lampard, let him do the media, and Lee is number two. Perfect. But there is like I was on Guardian Football Weekly this morning with Barney Ronay, was on it as well, and he made the point, which I hadn't really thought of before, and it really feels true now, where, as you mentioned, we all were saying, like, Southgate's going to hand over this incredible foundation for someone to take over and just sprinkle a bit of something and we're going to go off and win. His point was Southgate's departure leaves a massive hole in the FA, like not just in terms of the England manager, but like everything. Like, he was already important in the FA in terms of development schemes before he even became national team manager. He then basically became the whole embodiment of like men's senior football, and he's gone. And they haven't had to make a decision at the FA of this level for basically a decade.
Some of the managers that are on the at the top of the betting market are in post. They have jobs to do at the moment, and it could cause real issues again if the FA make the wrong move in kind of trying to engage with someone that already has a job. So, Carsley's not going to be the next England manager. So I think that's pretty clear. I think. Do you think?
I don't know.
It feels
say
unlikely.
On the last week, it's very unlikely that he'll be the next England manager. I don't think he wants to be the next England manager. I think his awkwardness handling the scrutiny in the press is a problem. I love Lee Carsley, and I defend him on a lot of points, but I also think, based on the two camps so far, I don't think he should be England's next manager. However, I strongly believe he should be involved as an assistant, something like that. The players have consistently said how incredible they think he is. They have said how much fun they are having in the camps, how much fun they're having in the training sessions, how detailed his tactical stuff is, how great the meetings are. I think it would be insane to lose that, because the players clearly buzz off him. And in modern football, your assistant coach can, and quite often does, do most of the tactical stuff anyway, most of the coaching stuff anyway. So I don't think it's impossible for us to find the right balance of a statesman at the head of things, who can handle the pressure, who can do the Southgate stuff that Southgate was really good at, that has very little to do with how the team plays on the pitch, and have Carsley involved. He clearly doesn't have a massive ego like most managers. We talked about it before he became interim. When he was Brentford interim manager, he made it clear he didn't want the job full time. He preferred development football. He preferred coaching, not management. So I'm hoping that being England assistant would still appeal to him after this experience. That coaching these incredible players. Every coach I know, their obsession is coaching the best players that they can reach the level at, because it's fun for them to coach elite players. He's already won the under-21s Euros, and at that level, there is nothing else to win. So my strongest stance right now, we'll get into potential England managerial candidates. My strongest stance is Carsley has to be involved. Has to be involved.
I would agree with that. My concern is that would he, obviously it depends on who the replacement would be, but would he rather be head coach of the England under-21s, and then doing so kind of develops his own head coaching CV? Because I do assume that's what he wants to do.
He's already done it. He literally, he can't do anything more with them than he's already done, and it's a different group of players as well. So it is like starting again.
I know.
And also, they've just had 2 international breaks with Ben Futcher in charge. So I think there's a bit of an awkwardness now if Carsley rocks back up.
How did Futch go on?
He's doing all right.
Good.
Yeah.
Could he be the statesman?
He's enjoying having Morgan Rogers and James McAtee, I can tell you that.
Yeah. I mean, I have, and it's kind of what England had to an extent. I mean, I do think a model for international football management of having just a guy who has been there, he's done major tournaments as a player, he can just face up to the media and smile and look nice and deal with the pressure, while someone else is doing all of the actual coaching work, is probably quite a good model. But
you don't need that necessarily.
No, so right now,
so the alternative.
Who are the alternatives?
Well, if you want, look, the obvious two sort of big sexy names are Pep Guardiola and Thomas Tuchel.
Yeah.
Two elite coaches, Pep obviously being the elite coach of his generation, and Tuchel having won the Champions League and has a good record at the top level. They can come in and do it all. I mean, they've got, Tuchel has his issues, it seems, with some of the personalities he's worked with in the past, maybe not great at managing upwards. Some of his club jobs have ended in acrimony. Pep is Pep. He will want to do things his way, for sure, and he'll probably want his own people with him. Maybe he would want an English assistant in there. Maybe he would have that sensibility around him to maybe think that would be a good thing for him to have. He's worked with a lot of different assistants at Man City and through his career, so he's not sort of tied to like one guy. He's not Harry Redknapp and Joe Jordan. He can get anyone in there. But he, nevertheless, he'd be running the show, and that would be great. But he's got to be, if you're the FA, he's got to be the number one candidate because his contract is up. Now, that doesn't mean that he will do it or he wants to do it or he'll be available by the time his contract's up, because he might sign a new contract. It could turn at any moment. I think he's been in Abu Dhabi over these international breaks, which is the sort of times when they'll be working on him going, come on, Pep, let's have 2 more years.
If you're the FA, how do you manage? Presumably, if it was going to be Pep, it wouldn't be announced till the summer or till the end of the season.
Does a huge managerial reign like his at City not normally get announced as being over quite a few months before?
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm thinking Klopp. I'm thinking Sir Alex.
So you're thinking nice Christmas present announcement.
Yeah, it helps it helps spur the team on to win everything they can win, because it's the last time they'll play with him. They have a bit of time to to kind of test the waters in terms of a successor. And Pep gets to announce that he'll be the next England manager.
What would Pep do in those like long breaks between games?
He'll go absolutely crazy.
I think he would insist on going in as like a guest coach at all the clubs where the players are, so he can like be there.
Yeah, I actually can't like allow myself to accept that he would want the job, because if I allow myself to accept that it's a possibility, then I'm setting myself up for a lot of heartbreak. Because I would love Pep Guardiola to be England manager.
Don't rule it out. He hasn't ruled it out himself. He's done an interview with Italian TV over the international break. God knows why he's over there doing that, but he is. And, you can twist these sorts of remarks any way you want. He said, they asked him about his future, and he basically said, I'm not sure yet. Anything could happen. And so that's not a no. And the door is slightly ajar.
He would have zero. If he's going to win a World Cup, he's not going to do it for the country that he played for, because he's not going to manage Spain. He's very proud Catalan. He campaigns for Catalan independence. That's just not going to happen. So if he wants to win a World Cup, which for someone who's won everything, why wouldn't he want to give that a role? You're probably looking at England, Brazil. He has to manage one of these teams. And if you also consider that he took a break from football after, was it Bayern before City, and he went and lived in New York for 18 months. Yeah. Like, he's someone who clearly likes the idea of having some off time. So maybe then, I presume he loves where he lives at the moment, up north.
He got really into golf, didn't he?
He can he didn't have to move. He'd have loads of time off in between. Like, it kind of makes sense. I still worry that he is someone who, if you're going to pick one weakness in his whole managerial reign, it is the Champions League, and it is basically taking teams away from home and knockout tournaments in the Champions League, which is basically that's what the whole job is.
Some wild team selections.
Overthinking individual. Unlike Tuchel, who's obviously, he's almost the reverse Pep, where league campaigns and consistently he probably underperforms, but in individual matches and in cup competitions, it's where he excels. Okay,
well, so would you go for Tuchel then?
No, but I still think with Thomas Tuchel, you've got someone who has never managed international football before, and Pep. I still think in my mind they're so different. I guess the good thing with Guardiola is that he has been to 6 major international tournaments as a player, which I think helps.
Yeah.
Whereas Thomas Tuchel's never been to a major tournament unless he's been as a fan or a pundit, which I think is significant. Like, it's a different game. It's a different.
Yeah.
The assignment is so different as to what you're trying to do, and the time you have to work with these players. Like, Tuchel is known to be so meticulous in terms of his match preparation, to the extent that some players love it. Some absolutely hate it. They cannot stand it. It's like chess for him. And when you've only got a finite time to work with them, I think that could unravel very, very quickly.
I think he'd have more problems coming into the job than Pep on the non-football side of things. I think he would. I can see him being more likely to get wound up by the English media. Yeah. You know, Pep's got that in him as well, but I think Pep would have the red carpet rolled out for him, and I think everyone would be just over the moon that he was there. Whereas Tuchel, I think there would be a bit more scrutiny. There'd be a bit more people waiting for him to make mistakes or whatever. I think the German thing would be an issue for some people still, for some reason, or for obvious reasons. But yeah, it's interesting that you make that comparison in terms of their records in knockout football. And Tuchel is the favourite at the moment. He's odds on with a lot of the bookies at the moment.
Without a job, I mean, it just helps that if there's someone where England just want to go get it done now, he's the obvious candidate. The issue is that you've got Manchester United, who are surely watching the England and Tuchel links, thinking like, if we want to get him, now's our time to go. And I'm sure Tuchel would probably prefer the United job to the England job. I would assume. And
Southgate has kind of ruled himself out from taking that job.
Well, the England
publicly.
job.
No,
him back.
The United job. But, hey, strange things have happened. But
get him in with Lee as assistant. It's perfect.
Ali, to your point earlier about choosing the right person and being careful about who you go for first, I think Pep is the only one you could get away with doing that. I think if you go for Pep, I think anyone, and if you don't get him, anyone coming in after him gets it. You're obviously going to go for him because he's the best guy.
Yeah.
And if you're second to Pep, that's not a bad place to be. If you're Eddie Howe, let's say.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about Pep and the reverse Pep, which I think is a nice nickname for Tuchel. And I remember the impact that he had on the Chelsea team that he took over from Lampard, particularly in those Champions League games on their way to winning it. And the fact that the next season, when things unravelled, particularly in the league, they still reached 2 cup finals, the League Cup and the FA Cup, didn't win either of them. You know, whether or not this is just focusing on the wrong thing, it is, given to your point, he's never managed international football. He's never managed an international team before. It makes you feel a bit better that the things he's done well are cup competitions, because we know that knockout tournament football, particularly international, is completely different to club league football. That's kind of a tick in the box, but I don't know whether that's just focusing on the wrong thing. That's what's difficult, because he also is, as Dave alluded to, I could see him having a real tough time in the media, in the press conferences. His response to questioning and pressure has not always been particularly good, and maybe Pep's the one that just kind of gets away with that stuff. You know, it feels like if we don't get Pep now after this conversation, I'm going to be a bit disappointed. Like if we touch on some of the other names on the list at the moment, Tuchel's the favourite, Carsley second favourite, Guardiola third favourite. After that, it's Graham Potter, Eddie Howe, and fun time Frankie Lampard.
So Graham Potter has had. I mean, I'm a huge fan of his. Just to say, I think the job that he's done, the job he did at Brighton was exceptional. But he's been in a job with world class players and under severe scrutiny at Chelsea, and it really went wrong. And a fair few of those Chelsea players would be quite central players to his England side, and I think therefore the fit doesn't look particularly good to me. It's Eddie Howe and Jason Tindall. I think you have to say, like, Tindall would be the man with the iPad on the ground next to Eddie Howe if he got the England job. Obviously, they've done unbelievable things at Bournemouth. The start at Newcastle was very good. I think they would be relatively solid, but again, massive doubts in my mind around whether or not they would translate what they've done in terms of league football to international football. Maybe they would. Maybe he'd be a better international manager, but my point is just that we don't know. I think Frank Lampard, if Frank Lampard were to get another Premier League job, I think it would be a bit of a farce. But I personally think that he is someone who probably would be way better suited to being England manager than anything else. Purely in terms of, as I say, I'm not saying I want him, just to clarify, but I can understand why he'd be spoken to by the FA for this role. If you accept now that you're going to put like an elite level coaching structure behind him. So it's not just Frank Lampard and Jody Morris. It's Frank Lampard, it's Lee Carsley, and you're going to cherry pick the best coaching talent beneath him. I think Lampard would be that person who the players, given his previous as a player, would buy into to an extent, who would bring that kind of the media savvy that I think you have to have, as we're seeing with Carsley, to do the job, who has been to many major tournaments previously, so understands the rigours of it. I'm definitely not saying I want him to get the job, just to clarify, but he's quite a good example in my mind as to why you don't necessarily need to be an elite level club manager. Like, let's look back at England in the past, where we've fallen into this trap before. Like, we went after Capello, and it became obvious so quickly that we hired a guy who spoke very little English, who had actually genuinely no interest in the development of English talent at all, and it was a complete mess. And now, having had a manager who, no matter what you think of him, has quite clearly overseen a period where England have gone from being no hopers to we expect, who had a massive vested interest in the development of English football, English talent, who had also had previous experience in international tournaments as a player and as an under-21s manager. There are kind of similarities, and also had a club management career which went okay to an extent, but realistically ended in failure. And there's not a chance he got another Premier League job afterwards. There are some similarities in their profiles that suggest to me that maybe he is someone who, as an international manager, could have a bit more success than when you're basically put under the tactical spotlight heavier in the Premier League.
It's a tough job for the FA. I really do believe that, because just like hiring a manager when you're running a club team, it's really, really difficult to get it right. What percentage of managerial hires are unmitigated successes? Well, quite a low percentage. On the point of appointing a manager, you'll always think we've got the right guy, having weighed up everything. And I think the managers that we're talking about, they all have relatively unique profiles, right? Some of them are well known for their tactics and cup competitions, but maybe not so good in terms of the man management and the media. Some of them are great at the media and would be probably great at the man management side, but whose ability to coach a press has been completely disastrous at every point.
He can coach a press.
I didn't say what I was talking about.
They run. they just don't do it very well.
Yeah. Do you think coaching a press is just telling them to
No,
I think it's where they run and what they do when they get there.
They literally press.
Right.
It's just not very effective.
So he's not very good at coaching a press.
Correct, yeah.
Then there's Eddie Howe, who I don't really know how to kind of categorise him, but clearly no international football experience like most of the guys that we're talking about. So like a club team hiring a manager, I think what the FA have to do, sitting here, going through everyone and building our perfect England manager and all of the skills and experiences that they should have in an ideal world, makes me realise that we're looking for something that doesn't exist. So we need to look at what does exist and work out what's best for the situation. And I think that is literally the FA's job. And I think that's really, really difficult. And I think it will be hard to judge upon appointment, as is so often the case. We will obviously give our opinion when the next England manager is hired, and we might be happy or we might not be very happy. But our own ability to predict success is going to be pretty flawed, just like the media's is, just like fans' is. It's really, really difficult to get it right. And being England manager is the impossible job, as we're told. So it's pretty fascinating. It's going to be good to do podcasts about. I'm pretty excited about that.
My main concern is that the FA just won't get it right. I think they got lucky with Southgate. It turned into a really good situation for them, but he was the guy who came in and stepped into the breach in an unprecedented situation after Allardyce left and grew into it pretty quickly. But as we've said earlier, he didn't want it at the start. He was unsure about it at the start, and it became what it became. I don't know if I trust the FA's processes and decision making to go out and impress a guy like Pep and to get it and to get him in this moment. So I think that's the interesting thing.
What can they pay? Can they pay the best manager in the world the biggest managerial salary in the world? Because that would help. I knew that we could do that,
they can't.
That would help a lot.
The answer to that question is no. They obviously can't pay as much as basically Abu Dhabi would pay Pep or whatever. But
right, and we consistently, as fans, underestimate how important money and salaries are to managers. We want them to want to have the most perfect career and the most perfect coaching experience, and then Jurgen Klopp becomes the whatever he is of Red Bull, and we're like, oh, Jurgen, everything you said over the last 15 years, we can't match that up with your new job. Well, yeah, because we focus too much on that stuff.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter as much to them.
Pep wants to rise for his next job. He's going to have to go to Saudi.
You have to trade on reputation.
Out there.
Yeah.
I don't see why he'd have. He's been manager of Man City. You think he's against?
No. I'm not
working in and around the Middle East.
No, I don't. But I also think there will be an element of the competitiveness of, as I said, he has won everything.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he will want to, at some point, try and win an international tournament.
That's the big thing the FA have got to try and attract anyone with, is come to England,
win a World Cup,
and do it.
Yeah.
That hasn't been done for so long. It could be you.
Well, we've got another international break in November, and we'll be back with another England pod. And for the foreseeable, there will likely be a new, fresh England pod feed at some point in the future. So if you want to listen to us talk about England for the next 5-10 years, at some point it will be necessary for you to listen to it on its own feed. We will make it very clear when that is available to move across to, and we will give you plenty of opportunity, so there's no excuse to miss it when that happens. For now, we will stay on the Not the Top 20 podcast feed. When we come back in November, it'll be the denouement of UEFA Nations League Group B, and I'm hoping we win it. I want us to win everything, and that will mean beating Greece, that will mean beating Ireland. Let's do it. Will Lee Carsley be in the dugout? I think he probably will. If not, Lee, I'm a big fan of yours. We'll always have Georgia, summer 2023. And I'd like to finish by bringing up a quote of his that hasn't been picked up on much from the last week, and there's been lots that's been picked out of his press conferences. I was inspired when he said, "One of my things is definitely never having any regrets." Just overall, away from football in life, I think that's a lovely way to live. So go on, Lee Carsley. Come on, England. We'll be back again next month with another episode of the England Pod. Hope you're enjoying our return, and speak again soon.